Dan wil ik jullie allemaal nog een keer van harte welkom heten bij deze webinar over ransomware. Ik ben Jara, ik ben verantwoordelijk voor de marketing en ik ben gelukkig goed hoorbaar nu. Deze webinar wordt in samenwerking gegeven met Third Tier. Daarmee hebben we twee dames, Amy en Susan, die nemen straks de presentatie van mij over. Ik ga jullie eerst nu wat uitleggen over de kits die wij beschikbaar gaan stellen. Het zijn twee kits. In eerste instantie hebben we een Ransomware Prevention Kit. Die wordt mede mogelijk gemaakt door Third Tier en die maken wij beschikbaar voor iedereen die nu aanwezig is. En daarnaast hebben wij een Marketing Kit. Daar kom ik straks nog even op terug. Even kijken, over de Prevention Kit. Het doel is dan voornamelijk om tips, tricks en tools aan te bieden om ransomware te voorkomen. En daar onder andere hebben we group policies in zitten, firewall settings en nog meer. En ik verzoek jullie allemaal om daar straks in te gaan kijken. Tot het eind zal ik jullie allemaal een e-mail sturen. En daarmee komt een link in waarmee je een sharefile krijgt waarin de Marketing Kit en de Prevention Kit in zitten. Dan hebben wij de Marketing Kit. Deze kit heeft voornamelijk twee doelen. Het eerste doel is om het onderwerp bij klanten aanspreekbaar te maken en dat jullie, de partners, er iets in kunnen betekenen. En het tweede doel is dat de online backup de oplossing kan zijn voor ransomware. Deze marketingkit bevat een paar onderdelen, een algemene presentatie, een e-book, social media items en een blog item. Deze kunnen jullie gebruiken naar believen, dus mochten jullie een blog item op jullie site willen plaatsen, dan mogen jullie die gebruiken en die kunnen jullie dan promoten via een social media item. Hierbij heb ik even een voorbeeld genomen van ons e-book. De voorkant en de binnenkant en wat informatie wat erin staat. Maar nogmaals, op het eind zal ik jullie een e-mail sturen met deze link en die kunnen jullie dan rustig bekijken. Nou, dat was mijn onderdeel van deze webinar. Ik geef het woord nu over aan Susan en Amy. Susan en Amy, take the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Let me flip over to get it ready to go. Welcome, everyone. This is a very unusual seminar for us. I'm in California, Amy is in Michigan, and Marina is all the way over in the Netherlands. So it showcases that ransomware is worldwide as well as we are worldwide. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. For me, it's this morning. For Amy, it's kind of later on in the morning, and for you guys over there in the Netherlands, it's in the afternoon. So thank you, everyone, for coming and attending today. I'm going to turn it over to Amy, if Amy's got her microphone on, who will talk a little bit about Third Tier. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Susan. I just wanted to give you guys a little introduction of who Third Tier is and make sure that you know who the speakers are. On the left in the red, that is me. I'm actually standing on a beach in the Netherlands. I know you can't make me out so well, but I did want to, Donna, I thought it was appropriate to post that picture. I actually visited my friend and colleague Marina Rose, who lives in the Netherlands last fall, and we did some traveling around. So I'm the owner of Third Tier. I also own an MSP and another company that helps people buy and sell their MSP businesses. Marina does some work for us at Third Tier. She handles a lot of server and migration issues, networking issues, those kinds of things. She has a long history in the small business world, having been one of the main women over at smallbizserver.net back in the day and doing migrations over at SBS Migration, and now she's helping us out at Third Tier. And then your presenter today is Susan Bradley. Susan Bradley is she's an accountant. She has MVP from Microsoft in Enterprise Security. She has achieved her GSET certification from SANS Security Institute, and she does a lot of writing for us at Third Tier. In addition to the webinars, she's one of the main authors of the Ransomware Kit. She produces the patch grid that gives you information about what's happening with the monthly patches, and also provides the information for the super secret news, which I would encourage you to sign up for. If you go to our website, You will see a place on the right-hand column of any page once you're off the home page where you could sign up for that news, and that is a bunch of security news around the industry that we like to keep you informed of, and a lot of that these days revolves around ransomware and what's going on. If you could flip over to the next slide, Susan. So what we do at Third Tier, in addition to the ransomware kit, is we help IT people. That's all that we do. So if you have a problem that you're stuck on, if you have a situation where you're in a technical expertise where you're not that comfortable, if you've really been spending too long on that particular issue and you need someone to help you to solve it, that is what we do. We can also cover you if you want to go on a vacation or a holiday. You know, anything to help you out from a technical perspective. That's what Third Tier does. That's why we exist. So I hope that you will check out our other services. You can find us over at www.thirdtier.net. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susan to talk all about ransomware.
I had to laugh a little bit when we started this presentation. There was a talk of a ransomware marketing kit. I don't think you need to work too hard to market quote-unquote ransomware. The bad guys are doing that quite well. It seems like every single day that I look at the security headlines, ransomware is in the news, or there's a new variation of ransomware, or there's something coming out. And today we're going to talk about, here's the agenda for this morning, for the afternoon for you guys, a little history of ransomware, the impact to our clients, and how to prevent and how to protect ourselves from getting it. There's not a day that goes by that I kind of go, ooh, what are they doing now? How are they changing? It's every single time that we come up with a better idea on how to protect ourselves, the bad guys go, ooh, that's a good idea, and they devise a way around it. Just the other day I saw that we're starting to get attackers looking at ways to go around app locker and whitelisting. Whitelisting is one of the, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, whitelisting is one of those ones we're looking at for some good long-term protection, and the bad guys are already looking into that. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm sure we will never get rid of ransomware because there's always money in ransomware. It's very effective. To me, it's the biggest threat to your data, to your business, and to your livelihood. To your client's data in particular, the ransomware doesn't necessarily want to damage that data, but they do want to hold it so they can get money from you. This is all about the money. So follow the money. They don't want to damage your data, but they've figured out a very, very good way to take that information, wrap it up in encryption, and say, hey, you won't get it back until you pay us the money. And they make it very hard for you to get it back without a good backup. What ransomware does is it ransoms the data or functionality of your computer, which is typically to pay a ransom back in the form of bitcoins or other payment method. It's been around for, this is not new, it's been around for several years. It typically encrypts documents because obviously they've identified that documents are where we make our money from. It's what we treasure in our offices. It also, originally it used to just go for the local drives, and then we started talking about, oh gee, it's going to go after network drives, and of course then it went after networks. It is used to just scan for mapped network drives. Now it scans for all network locations. Some ransomware variants, in fact, specifically target network shares. Crypto Fortress, for example, scans and encrypts file shares immediately. It will go after that. Okay, obviously, they know that's where our data is. It runs as the logged-in user, which is why it's so effective. You don't necessarily need to have the admin rights. It doesn't have to use any kind of trickery to gain more access on a system. So whatever that user that clicks on that item that infects their system, whatever rights they have to any other network location, that's where it targets. So if I'm somebody in the office and I have access to the accounting records and I have access to the payroll records, and if I have access to all sorts of information, that's exactly where this ransomware will target. So any map drives, any network shares, think in terms of, go back to your basics of NTFS permissions. What does that user have permissions to? And that's exactly where the ransomware is going to go after. Why can't antivirus stop it? Well, because it's kind of not like a true virus. It's using pretty normal stuff, encryption tools, it's coming in as an email attachment, and it morphs over and over again, so it's very, very difficult for an antivirus vendor to build detection software. Obviously, there's always somebody that's going to be first impacted, which is why we're always behind the 8-ball. What they're starting to do now, what I'm seeing many of the antivirus vendors do now, is do what they call behavioral programs, where if suddenly a behavior of a program runs differently, they'll react to that. That means there's sometimes false positives, where you'll have an antivirus vendor be a little bit too robust and they'll go after things that they shouldn't, but unfortunately sometimes you have to take the good with the bad these days. It uses normal processes that antivirus doesn't or hasn't detected, and it relies on the fact that we're not so good about doing backups. We don't test our backups. And it primarily uses AES encryption where you need the private key. If you're familiar, I'm sure you are familiar with encryption process where there's a private key and a public key, and there's always one part of this process that you have half of it, but you don't have the other half of the key, and that private key, and they hold on to that and ransom that private key back to you. There have been cases to take control of the command and control servers and get some of the keys back, but that's usually the exception, not the rule. Initially, it was popular in Russia, and obviously it did such an effective job in getting money out of people that it started to go worldwide. I don't know any country other than perhaps maybe Antarctica that it hasn't hit these days. And it really started taking root and becoming a normal thing in about 2013. I started to see the FBI talk about it probably about a year ago, and I'm seeing more and more resources being devoted to it. What I'm also saying now is it used to target smaller firms. We're now seeing headlines where it's going after much larger firms. You've probably seen in the headlines where they've hit hospitals, they've shut down police departments, so no matter how big or how small, it can get into a system if somebody accidentally clicks. What it does, somebody clicks on something or they have a banner ad that they go through and they accidentally get affected by that, and an exploit kit drops into their system. The virus uses encryption and keeps that private key on their server. The encryption runs extremely fast. I've heard some people talk about, well, the minute you get encrypted, you'll get an email. By the time you, as the MSP, gets the email, it's probably too late. The encryption has already occurred because it is extremely fast. However fast the machine is, that's how fast it goes through the network. And then, of course, on the system itself, a ransomware is displayed along with a countdown calendar of how many days you have to pay, how much Bitcoin you're going to have to get in order to pay the ransom back, and you have to give them, sort of in a bizarre way, credit. They run a very tight system, a tight shop. They even have a help desk because obviously they want to get the money out of you as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. So they do nicely, if I may give, I hate to give credit to attackers, but the software, it works. The Bitcoin process works. If, heaven forbid, you have to pay the Bitcoin process back, everyone that I've ever contacted does get their data back. I don't recommend that you pay the ransom because obviously we're keeping these guys in business when we do that. But if you, heaven forbid, you get to the point where you have no other options, I've never heard of a single situation where somebody hasn't gotten their data back from the encryption process. These days I'm seeing it more and more in banner ad bundles, and the ones that give me pause and make me not sleep well at night in my firm is targeting the zero-day flash, the Adobe Flash. And nowadays we have in Windows 8.1 and Windows 10 we have Flash embedded into the operating system. And we just yesterday, in fact, had a Adobe Flash patch come out. So the rule of thumb that I have is If you use it, patch it. If you don't, get rid of it. And what you want to look for these days is Adobe Flash, Java, Silverlight. Those are the three in particular that I say use them or lose them, meaning that you need to make sure that you have some way to patch them. And if you don't have a way to patch them, or if you don't need them, in the case of Java, we're starting to get where we're needing it less and less. I'm only needing it on certain servers these days. For some, I have a couple of servers where I still need Java, but usually on my desktop these days, I'm getting to where I don't need it as much. And so try it, try uninstalling it, and see if you can get away without it. I can't say that you can do this 100% of the time. We still have some banks and we still have some financial institutions that need Java, but just see if you can start to wean your way off of Java. Another recent one was the Locky macro virus, which used both Word and Excel macros. Again, that's one of those ones where ask yourself if you need to have macros running from files that come in from the internet. There's a way, and we've got this included in our CryptoLocker kit, and the ransomware kit is instructions on how to set a group policy, or through registry, if your MSP tools use registry keys, where you say, okay, the macros can run from this location, this network location is secure, but if I get a file from outside of this special place, we're not going to let macros run. So take a look at your clients that you work with. Not everybody needs macros. Those that do, they probably don't need them running from internet locations. So you can probably devise a way where they just need to run from a special location on the network and nowhere else. The latest one I've seen is Cerber ransomware. It too uses exploit kits, and exploit kits is in this lovely economy that we have. You don't necessarily have to write your own exploit kit. You can go out to a marketplace and buy an exploit kit, and usually they're targeting Flash exploits, 0-day in Flash, or they're using Word macros. Sometimes I've seen them use Java, so they look to see what we have unpatched on our system and bundle it up into an exploit kit. Where I'm saying this too is coming in from invoices. I'm sure you've seen this too. Please play this invoice. We show that you owe $2,000. What? What do you mean I owe $2,000? Let me click on that. And of course that's where the targeted exploit is included in that. Zip files. Question if your clients really need zip files coming all the way into the office. See if they can make sure you have a mail hygiene in front of any mail server, or use some kind of cloud hosted server for that. So always take a look at those attachments and ask your clients, do you really need that coming all the way into the office, or can we say this is okay and we need to filter these things better because you don't need those coming in. The Cerber ransomware brings in RTF attachments, which launch Word in order to launch the attack. This is one I just got recently. I'm a moderator on the patchmanagement.org listserv, and it's a website and listservs devoted toward tracking issues with patches. And because I'm a moderator and because it's the email address is very open up there, I get a lot of spam coming into that email address, which actually kind of in a bizarre way because it lets me kind of keep track of what threats are out there. And literally I was seeing this just the other day where the RTF files were coming in, and obviously they'd launch Word and they would obviously take over your system and launch ransomware onto your system. So how do we protect ourselves? First and foremost, start with those basics. Start with a full backup. Make sure you have rotations. Make sure you have versioning on the cloud backups. As I say, you can never have too many backups. Patch it or lose it. Flash, Java, Silverlight. Make sure you have a process in order to identify that those applications are on your systems and patch them. Again, just yesterday, second Tuesday of the month, Microsoft brought out another Adobe Flash update. If you don't need Flash in your environment, see if you can block it in the browser, especially on Windows 8.1 and Windows 10. Again, the ones that keep me up at night are those zero-day Flash exploit kits that I go, wait a sec, I mean, if it's a 0-day, I don't have a patch for it. So if I've got somebody in the office that's a little too click happy and he or she has gotten themselves into trouble before, I always go, do they really need Flash? Let's see if we can pull that out of the browser and make ourselves a little more protected. Review your antivirus and anti-malware software. Many of them these days are beefing up their ransomware, anti-ransomware protection. With a cloud back, make sure you have versioning enabled on the cloud backup, and remember that your sync cloud folders can be impacted as well. So if you have a file encrypted on your desktop, and if that file is up in a cloud backup or a sync, yes, that now encrypted version is going to go syncing right back up to your cloud backup. So make sure you have versioning and you've got sync folders set in such a way that they don't immediately replicate. Or if they do, you've got versioning set up on those. So again, review your settings on there. Make sure you have backups often. Make sure you have versioning. And this is a key one as well. Make sure the location of the backups are only accessible for a special user or an administrative user or somebody that isn't going to click accidentally on something. Because whatever that user has access to is what ransomware will go after. So if that user has access to that drive over there where all of your backups are, ransomware is going to be able to access that drive as well. So consider setting up special backup permissions, special users. Review how you have your permissions. When preparing an offsite backup, make sure the method isn't able to overwrite immediately. And if you're looking at offsite locations, make sure, again, look to see who has access to that in a cloud environment and make sure it's a special user. And always test your backup. Delete a file, one file on your local drive, and see how easy it is to get that backup, get that restored file back. Always test, and don't be in, like, you're going to be in a panic situation, your client's going to be in a panic situation when this occurs. Make sure you test your backups. And I'd even recommend, I'm sure everyone has either heard of ransomware or been touched by ransomware. I would say we need to start writing down, and in fact even got it in the ransomware kit, have a checklist, have a what they call emergency list, that when you get faced with ransomware, here's what to do first, here's what to ask yourself, here's what to ask the client. And we've actually got that in the kit. So kind of when you're in the immediate, when you're got to the client and they're in a disaster stage and they're kind of flustered, you kind of can be flustered as well. So that's why I have a checklist to kind of make you slow down and say, hey, let's check to see where the backups are. Let's check to see what they got. Let's review the network and see where we're at. Let's take a inventory of what's going on. You've heard the you can never have too much memory. I'd say you can never have too many computer backups. I do on-site, cloud, rotations, you name it. Hard drives are cheap these days. It's amazing how much storage you can get in a cloud backup these days for a pretty reasonable fee. You can never have too many backups. Minimize the number of map drives. Review those permissions. Does every user in the office need to have permissions to everything in the office? I'd say no. Now's the time, and especially if you are in a situation where you're moving from maybe on-premise servers to more cloud solutions, this is the time to review how the network is set up. Who actually needs rights to those systems? Make sure you patch Java, Flash, and Silverlight or remove them. Review how your backups are made. Review if you have enough backups. Again, premise, rotation, cloud. Review what account is made to use the backup. And I always look too at what other tools do we have in our arsenal in order to protect this stuff. Can you block at the firewall? Yes, you can. Now granted, some of this is we're always one step behind because they are a moving target, but still it's a good way to protect yourselves. Any anonymizing service, see if your firewall vendor will block proxies and anonymizing services. Consider filtering Dropbox. There's many a times I've seen ransomware come in through actual true Dropbox links that, yes, Dropbox does finally delete, but initially for a little bit they're there and they're live, and it gives me pause. So if Dropbox is not something that your client needs, consider dropping that, blocking that feature. And as I always say, you know, if your firewall is one that hasn't had an update itself in a long time, I think it's time to review and see if you need a new firewall. So I often get asked, how come we can't block encryption? I mean, why can't we just, you know, turn that thing off and then that our devices won't be encrypted? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Encryption is native to the operating system. It's used for key elements that we use on a day-to-day basis. For example, we need the crypto service, which is what they use, what the attackers use. The crypto service is used when we do online surfing with the SSL. We need it for SSL keys. We need it for Windows updates. So if we turn off the crypto service, we would not have a fully functioning operating system. So unfortunately, we can't turn that off. Sometimes, depending on if mostly it's been Microsoft and other law enforcement companies, if they've been able to take back control of the command control server and getting all of the private keys, there's been situations where they've been able to publish the public keys back. So you can go up, you can take an encrypted file, go up to a repository, put in the file, and they'll say, hey, yeah, we see your private key in the system. Here it is back, and you can decrypt it. That's not, don't expect that to always occur, because obviously that only occurs when the law enforcement have gotten control of the command and control service, what's called the CNC servers. Consider upgrading. Again, if your firewall does not have updates, my firewall just 2 days ago, in fact I need to schedule a reboot of it, receives updates to the core engine as well as DAT file updates. If you cater or do work with home users, I would suggest you'd look at Sophos UTM, Unified Threat Management. It's free to home users, and take a look at it is an extremely powerful firewall. You can set it up as a virtual machine. They also sell hardware units. There's Calyptix out there is another one that we recommend and use. Bottom line, look at the firewalls you have installed in your clients, and if they don't update on a regular basis themselves, it's time to upgrade that firewall. Consider using OpenDNS as your DNS provider. Some DNS purists don't like how OpenDNS does their thing. I like the fact that even in small environments, I can put additional filtering and additional protection for some of the categories of things that come in, like anonymizers and proxies and things like that. So take a look at OpenDNS and see if that's something that you might want to add, especially to people into clients where you may not have the ability to do firewalls and things like that. This is the part that people always laugh about. I call it patching your users. And it's true. Sometimes with everything that works, with all of the things that we have in the kit, and we have a group policies in the kit to block certain temp locations where the ransomware has written in the past. But sometimes it still, to this day, comes down to a savvy person looking at an email going, you know, I don't recognize that. So as I always tell people, it's really, really good to empower people to say, no, you don't have to click on something, you don't have to open it up, you don't have to install free applications, you don't have to go to websites, you don't have to click on banner ads, and in particular, sometimes when you get something and you're not quite sure, and with apologies to Microsoft, you don't have to open everything on a Windows device. We all have in our pocket a phone. And Windows Phone, iPhone, Android phones, those three, I've never ever heard of ransomware targeting those platforms. I shouldn't say that too loud because then the bad guys are going to go after that next. But truly, I tell people, if you ever get into a situation and you're not sure, and first and foremost, empower your clients to email the suspected links to you. And if you're not sure, feel free to email to me because we can check them out. Or send the links to virustotal.com and many other sites that can review it. So first off, empower people to say, let's stop and think. And if they still need to open that up and they're still not sure, take the phone out of their pocket and open that item up there. Because it's much, much easier to restore a phone than it is to restore an entire network. So we all have this little device in our pocket. If you're ever concerned, open the item up there. Don't open it up on the network. And I always say, you know, it's time to pull back from giving access to everybody and say, do they really need access to that? Do they really need to open that on a Windows device? Do they really need to get a file from an unknown, you know, Dropbox location that they've never heard of this client before? And are they using protected assets? I mean, is this a workstation they really should be opening that up on? I mean, think of the things that they have on that workstation and say, do I have the ransomware kit installed on this machine? No, I don't. Do I have Flash enabled in the browser? I still do. Should they be doing that, you know, potentially scary thing on the device that they're doing? If you're using VPN, review what remote machine is being used, and consider a remote access solutions that limits access in how personal devices. I've seen some people say that, and this has been true historically in the past, VPN from a home machine has sometimes brought things into a network. So if you're using VPN, you might want to consider putting in instead a RDP terminal services, as I call it in old-fashioned way, but remote desktop solution, some kind of remote FX or remote desktop where only the screen of the desktop goes over that connection. You don't need VPN, and especially it works well with tablets and mobile devices. So consider how remote access is set up and review if maybe that's not the best way to do it. You need to do it a different way than you're doing it now. Consider backups of workstations. We actually do this in the office. We do it for several reasons. One, it's easier to put the machine back the way it was, but also because of ransomware. Yes, most of us don't have that critical of things on the workstations, but it's still the time and energy and bother of putting everything back. So indeed, there's solutions out there. The backup vendors have backup solutions for workstations, and review permissions on that backup done on the workstation as well. In the CryptoLocker kit, we have the original CryptoLocker did this. It still does this to this day, which is why we still have it in the kit. We block the temp file writing locations because if you see to this day, it always uses the temp files to write to locations. There is some good and bad with this. It does impact installing Firefox and installing Office, so you have to build in some exceptions for that. But to me, I don't install Office that often, and I consider it kind of a, I'm willing to accept that I have to build in some exceptions for Firefox and I have to work around Office because to this day, blocking those temp files is still a really good way. We have group policies for domains in the third tier kit. And lots and lots of ideas and recommendations. There's one on using File Resource Manager to review what kind of files are certain key file names. You can use the file FSRM Manager to monitor the network drives for certain file names. And you can look at Bleeping Computer is one of the really good locations for keeping track of what the latest one is doing, and you can keep adjusting that to be whatever the latest ransomware is and monitor what's on the system, and then you can even set it up to send you alerts and things like that. If you're in non-domain situations, like if you have home users or standalone workstations where you cannot use group policies, a gentleman out there, and yes, this is a real domain site, full of Foolish IT, and obviously that's not what it looks like. Foolish IT has policies for non-domain computers that do the CryptoLocker blocking as well. So group policies are up on the third tier kit, but you can also, if you need help and information for non-domain, we've got that too. The Locky one that recently came out is storing location in the following locations, and I've even seen people put in blocks to these registry keys because that also gives the ability to protect yourself from the Locky virus. And as you can see, it goes down to the user profile and puts the ransomware information right on the desktop of the user as it infects that person. For macro blocking, the key thing is to determine what version of Office you have because you have to use a different group policy or a different registry key depending on what version of Office that you have. Because Office 2016 is one version, Office 2013 is another version, so you have to know which version. And if you have a firm that has multiple Office versions, you've got to put those blocks in the various different registry keys. So that's just an example there of the ADMX file that you'll need to download, and we've got the full instructions on how to do that again up in the kit, up on the third tier site. The next phase, I would say, of protecting against ransomware is going to be, I think, a more difficult one to do. It's going to take a little more time. And even this, I'm already seeing attackers starting to devise ways to get around application whitelisting. So this is a never-ending battle of just because we devise a way to protect ourselves, attackers look and see, okay, how can I get around that? And it's something called application whitelisting. And Windows 10 Enterprise SKU has application whitelisting, but unfortunately the Pro SKU does not. So you'll need to have some additional third-party software if you want to do application whitelisting. And what whitelisting does, it says, instead of the way we have it now, where we say anything can run on our systems, and we're just going to look for malicious stuff, it kind of flips the operating system around. And it says, I'm only going to let what applications that I know and trust to run, and anything else is going to go, nah, sorry, you can't run. And where this gets a little more complicated is obviously we have very dynamic systems. I mean, literally almost on a daily basis, there's new code on our systems. There's antivirus that gets updated. There's Flash sometimes that gets out of band updated. Sometimes we get multiple Windows 10 updates in a month. So every day we have def files up installing on our system. So obviously we keep changing the code in our system. So we have to build in a solution that's going to understand that this can change over here, but if you get a changeover in this part of the operating system, something's going on and we won't allow that. So here's some of the options you have in some of the vendors right now, and this is by all means not a definitive list. You may have something third-party that you're already looking at, but these are some of the ones that I'm aware of that have application whitelisting. Bit9, savantprotection.com. Obviously, you can upgrade your Windows 10 to enterprise licenses, and these days, with Windows 10, unlike in the past where you couldn't do an in-place upgrade between Pro and enterprise, you can now do that. So it's much easier. Whoops, let's go back. For home users, there's a program called Secure Plus. You can also look at WebRoot, Komodo, Malwarebytes Premium, but do watch, because these are programs that look for changes in applications and changes in the code. Sometimes they can impact updating and patching. And even just the other day I saw Malwarebytes Premium, someone suggested that it might be causing issues with Outlook connectivity. So they were making some adjustments to stop that from doing that. So again, if you install some of these and have unusual things occur, keep in mind they're a little bit heavier than your normal antivirus, and you may have to build in some exclusions and some workarounds. Some more options out there, Crypto Monitor and Hitman Pro. Both of these are what's called behavior detection programs. Again, it's looking to see what is happening with the code, and if there's anything unusual, it will alert you and stop that from happening. More options out there, whitecloudsecurity.com is more of an MSP built one for application whitelisting, and also sandboxy.com to kind of keep those applications into their own little sandbox. White Cloud Security is one that I've been looking at. I'll be honest with you, I have not installed it network-wide yet, but I am starting a trial in my own office. It basically has that same, understands that we have code that changes, and so it builds like a trusted network. So one person says, yes, this code is okay, and then it shares that yes, this is good code throughout everyone else in that peer-to-peer network, or in that trusted network that you've set up inside the application whitelisting network. And you don't have to then reinvent the wheel on every single one of your clients. So you've got a client over here that has certain kinds of software, and you've got another client over here that has similar software. You can say, okay, these rules over here, use them also over here. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time you go to a different client. So it's an interesting concept they're doing, and something to kind of keep an eye out on. So why isn't there a decryption tool for all of these ransomwares? Well, obviously we have to take over the server with the private key to encrypt, and that's hard to do. Sometimes it's hard because of legal rules, boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries, and sometimes it's just because, you know, with cloud servers these days, they can move from server to server so fast that they're here today and tomorrow they're off to another network someplace else. So it's not as easy to get that server with that private key to encrypt it. I've got some links down there to ones that have been identified, but again, if you can't come into a situation where you walk into a client where they have ransomware, don't count on that occurring. Always have the backup as your first line of defense. Some tools and resources. Thankfully with Cloud 2, they're going to provide, and thank you for them for doing that. They're actually, for all the seminar attendees today, they're actually going to provide you free of charge the ransomware kit. It's up at thirdtier.net. I will be adding some more unique to Windows 10 things in the next couple of weeks, so we keep updating it and revising it because the bad guys keep updating and revising. I also recommend that you keep an eye on bleepingcomputer.com, one of the best places on the websites these days to keep abreast of ransomware and all what the bad guys keep doing. The Foolish IT site, if you have standalone PCs or home users that you need to protect. And as always, if you have any issues or questions, you want to discuss some of your methodologies, please feel free to give me an email at susan@thirdtier.net. We're all in this together, and the more the good guys work together, the better it is to keeping the bad guys away, because they work together quite well. So I'd like us to all work together and pull together and do what we can to keep the bad guys at bay. And thank you very, very much for this morning's. For afternoon for you, morning for me. If you have any questions at all, I will be opening up the chat window. If you have any questions that you want to send my way through email, feel free. And again, have any questions, thank you again. It's been enjoyable. I always get, I don't say I can, I wish I was put out of business and not doing these presentations because it means that ransomware would go away, but I do love giving presentations on security, so thank you for attending. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free.
Hey Susan, there is one question in the chat window that I wasn't sure of the answer to. It's in the questions window actually. And that is, I'll just read it. How do you think the auto preview feature in Outlook with auto download of object on, many of our customers have that setting and feature. Can it in fact auto download a virus?
Do they indicate what version of Outlook? The newer versions of Outlook don't have the same risk as the older versions of Outlook. So I would say it depends. Don't you love that when people say that it depends? 2010, the ones that I'm okay with on that setting are 2013 and 2016. 2010 I would probably say no. 2007 definitely not. And heaven forbid if anyone is on 2003? Heavens no. So 10 is starting to be my, I've seen some situations where they've tricked 2010, but 2013 and 2016 I'm still okay.
Danny has a follow-up question asking if you know anything about Kaspersky's behavior detection application, and if you think it's effective.
I have seen it. The only thing I can say about any of these antiviruses is always, I think anytime you have a code that's looking for behavior of another code, it's always going to be a little bit behind. They're doing the best they can, but the bad guys read about it, they have the ability to download it and pull it apart, and they're going to be devising ways around it, which is why the bad guys are now devising a way around application whitelisting, app locker. I mean, that's just the other day.
Yeah, and that's really why where I think the strength of the ransomware prevention kit is because it's really just focused on providing a very secure, best practices networking environment, and you really can't beat good networking. I mean, the bad guys are always trying, but good networking, I think is the best winning strategy.
And for anyone who's not familiar with the ransomware kit, it's not a silver bullet. If you go, oh, if I install this one thing, that's it, that's not what it is. It is looking at, it's kind of stepping back from your network and going, okay, what do I need to review? Firewall. What do I need to review? Let's look to see how permissions are set. What do I need to review? Let's lock down those temp file locations. It's not just one thing, it's multiple things. It's going, hey, wait a sec, let's look at this. Let's redo how we have our NTFS permissions. Let's review our backup strategies. It's not just one thing. I'm also seeing in the question, do I need to remove the virus before I would pay the criminals if this would be the only option? We don't want another round. Usually what I've seen, and I don't want to give credit to bad guys, so take this the right way. Usually the virus is very easy to get rid of. It's not, and I wouldn't even say it's like a true virus. I mean, it's just encryption that runs, locks your system up, and throws up a banner ad. So it's relatively easy to get rid of that. Usually what people do is they do not, they follow the ransomware, because there's certain codes and information you have to get, and then you have to get your bitcoins, obviously, is they leave one system so that they can get to, because there's a link that they give you. But you can usually get rid of the virus as long as you have those instructions. Now, in the best case scenario, you would have client backups, server backups, and you'd restore everything. You'd then, and this is where that checklist comes into play, you'd also run your detection, I usually like to run something underneath the operating system, so you boot into a non-Windows platform and scan the operating system to make sure that it's fully cleaned off. But in a perfect world, that's how you would do it. In an imperfect world where you have no other option than to pay it, as long as you've got that information from the screen where it's got the link and the codes and the necessary information, you can get rid of the virus. You can get rid of the ransomware.
And Susan, there's now a question about how ransomware affects cloud drives. Specifically mentions being used in combination with Outlook, but I think it's good to review that oh yeah, they can reach your cloud.
If you have access to a cloud, and especially these days, if you have an older generation firm where they have the cloud drives as map drives, that's in particular where I've seen them first and foremost going after. But even then, even if they're not mapped, again, just think in terms of if that person who clicked on that bad thing has rights and access to wherever that is, whether it's cloud, on-premise, you name it, the ransomware has access to that very same thing. If the cloud backup is a sync of files on that system, absolutely those synced files will now trickle up to that cloud backup and be encrypted up there. Which is why we say review your cloud backups, make sure there's versioning turned on. And again, just it's that stepping back from how you've got things set up and how can you build layers, how you can build copies, and how you can build versions. Is the CryptoLocker program only active on the booted drive? Say I take out the infected disk, attach it to a clean system. Will that system also be infected, or is that program inactive at that moment? What I've seen in the past is CryptoLocker works when it's clicked on, or the banner, or you surfed on a banner ad. There's an action that starts the process. If you take and slave a drive and you don't click on the executable that starts the ransomware, I've not seen that transfer to like a slave situation. Now, hopefully the attackers are not listening to this. That's not to say it's not going to happen in the future, but at the present time, I have not seen attacks coming in like that. They usually occur on the active system. They usually occur when someone's clicked. They're occurring like Word macros, those zip the zip files or attachments to email, banner ads on websites. So there's a user interaction that's occurring. Does the ransomware need admin rights to start or install? No. That's the fun thing, if I can use that horrible word with ransomware. No, it uses the rights of the user, and it knows that you don't, just like how Chrome doesn't need admin rights to install, and therefore it uses the temp file locations or the user profile locations, it knows exactly how to install itself without admin rights, which is why it's being so effective. So if that person has normal standard rights, that just because a person has normal standard rights doesn't mean that he doesn't have the ability to write into his user files. So that's exactly where the ransomware goes to. I found out that the exe file which kicks off the attack is mostly in the roaming profiles map off the user who got it. Is the exe file always there in that map, or is this just a coincidence? Amy had one, let's see, what was it, about a year ago? You had a client that was in a roaming profile, and you thought you had it cleared off, and when the person came back in the office, it kicked off again, if I remember right. Was that the fact pattern?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, so we had a case where a laptop that belonged to the company did have our policies on it, so it should not have been affected. However, the local admin turned off the group policies in order to make some changes. And then while the policy were off, the user with the laptop left the office. While they were out of the office, they got infected. When they came back in, it uploaded their profile to the server and started infecting things. So it can happen with the profiles as they roam around, because it does this executable for ransomware resides primarily in the user profile, can also reside in the C drive temp folder, and one or two other locations. But they're with all the variants that we've seen of ransomware, it is pretty consistent that the executable is somewhere in the user profile, because that is an area where the ransomware writers can be certain that they can write to and that they can launch applications from, because a normal user does that every day as part of their work on their computer. So it's something that they know are not going to trigger an antivirus application warning because they haven't done anything unusual. They just launched an application from an area where the user always launches applications from.
And that's also a key way that you can know exactly who got infected. If you come into a network situation and you don't know where the original source of the infection was, for the files up on the server, look in the properties, look in the security tab, look to see who the owner of the file is, because with Windows it will stamp the file with who last had control of that file. And because the encryption is done in the rights of the user, as that file is encrypted, it'll stamp it with that person's user profile or user account. So basically go into the properties, go into the security tab, and you can say, aha, I better go to that person first because he's the one who nailed the network.
There's a question here about backup and whether if you encrypt your backup files, if these ransomware can then encrypt them again. And the answer is yes, they can. An encrypted file does not prevent another application from coming along and adding encryption to that encrypted file. And backup in particular is targeted now. Last month we did a webinar on StorageCraft and how to protect your StorageCraft backups. It really applies to all backups. What you really want to do is make sure that your users do not have the ability to write to the area where you're storing your backup. Create a specific user account for that, assign it only to that user. Your normal user accounts don't need to be able to write there. And remember that the ransomware is just using your normal user account, so you know, only allow your users to write to the places where they need to write. There's no reason for your users to be able to store files in your backup storage location. That should be for backup only.
Is IPv6 more risky than IPv4? Any internet connectivity, doesn't matter. I haven't seen them target one or the other. As long as you have access to the internet and as long as that user clicked on the bad thing, you're nailed. Does ransomware go after just the most common files or does it go after databases? At this time, I have not seen them specifically target SQL databases that because obviously they're making their money going after Word files and Word docs and things like that, and it's a very quick, fast encryption. To encrypt some of the databases would take longer, but I have full expectation that at some point in time they'll be doing that next, if they're not doing it already. So, I mean, bottom line, it's any location that user has rights to, and usually on databases, at least in my network situation, MySQL databases are set up in such a way that the user usually doesn't have rights to the SQL database. There's an application on the desktop that has set up permissions in such a way that the application goes in and then you log into this web interface like wrapper in the front. But the SQL database usually is kind of hidden, which is why I think we don't see ransomware, but certainly if you had somebody who had rights to that location where the SQL database is, it would nail that too. I think it's just because, I think we're not seeing it just because it's hitting end users and where SQL databases normally are in a network.
Yeah, so it is looking for data. So and it's looking to encrypt the data as quickly as possible. So there is a list of extensions that it's looking for. And that list is growing rapidly as they get more sophisticated, but they look for your CAD files, they look for your, your Word files, your Excel files, your Adobe files, anything where a company may be considered a data file, and it does generally ignore system files, right? It needs your system to stay running so that you can pay your ransom. So they're not looking to encrypt your system files. They're really just focusing on data so they can be fast and make sure your computer still works so you can pay them money.
And Jacko asked, do they search for networks for shares or only drives connected? Again, originally it was just the C drive. Then they started hearing us talk about, oh, they're not going after network shares. Then they went after network shares. Then they went after map drives. Then they went after UNCs. I mean, basically anything that the user has rights to.
we may have reached the end of our questions. If you have any more
questions.
questions.
Is it possible to block the shadow files? Again, it has to do with the permissions of the user. It will, what they originally did not do, and then they heard us talk about, oh, you can get the files back by using the shadow copies. Well, then they heard us talk about that, and they started using the command to delete the shadow copies. If, again, on the local machine, the user has the ability to get to their shadow copies, so it will definitely go after the shadow copies on the local machine. If you have your backup set up in such a way that the user on the machine has no rights to where those backup files are located, your backups will be safe. So again, go back to that user, look to see what rights does he have, and especially sometimes when you've inherited systems from other network administrators and they've given everyone domain admin privileges, yeah, you need to step back and redo that network because not everybody needs obviously a domain admin privilege. So it's all in what rights that user has and what ability they have to reach out to the network and do things.
You know, there's one exception to what I just replied about data files and if it's, you know, what kinds of files it's encrypting. I said, you know, it was just data files, but I'm reminded that there is also one variant out there that was encrypting the master file table on the master boot table. At the root of your drive, which would allow it not to read any files on the machine. So they're all still there. They just can't be read because your master boot table is corrupted, and it puts up a red window with the way to get your ransom back. So that one's kind of an exception in that it does attack a system file rather than a data file, but in that case, it only attacks the one file, which you, of course, will not have a backup of. So it's kind of an ugly choice, but they're getting very, very creative.
And Dan asked, will we ever get rid of this threat? I think it'll just change. I mean, when we finally get to the, I mean, when's the last time that we had a really good worm like Slammer, Blaster, Code Red, NIMDA? We don't have those big attacks anymore, those big worm-like attacks, because we put a firewall now on all of our operating systems. We put more protection. We have built a stronger operating system. So as we change, they change. Right now, this is the flavor that works. When we finally get to the point where we're all running application whitelisting and only let certain things run, they'll change their variants too and be introducing something else.
You know, I think I would go so far as to say that the ransomware threat is the new normal. And so you're going to have to develop new normal ways of making sure that your networks are well configured and well secured. It's easy to get lazy on who has rights to what, especially if you're working in small business environments where they'll tell you, oh, everybody needs access to everything. You hear that a lot, and it's never true. And it does leave them open for, you know, for these kinds of attacks. So it's something that you'll have to work with your customers. It is a good opportunity for some consulting dollars. Every business needs a review to make sure that they're safe, because if they're not safe, and remind them it's not 100% because this stuff changes all the time, but we can get them very, very close to 100% and go a very long ways to protecting them. And it just has to be done. This is the new normal. The ransomware is not going away. Miguel is in a hurry to get the ransomware kit. I love that, and I love that Cloud2 has purchased those for you, and appreciate their support on that. And I really look forward to to hearing from you guys that you're out there deploying these and making people safe. I want less money to go to the bad guys.
Here, here.
Nou, dan denk ik dat
A follow-up,
dit...
one more question for Dan. Dan said, would it be solved if we got rid of encryption? We'd have to reinvent so many things, and we are so entrenched with SSL and how we have, well actually it's not even SSL anymore, it's TLS, but it's so, I don't think that's even possible. It would be so many years before they'd introduce a new process of secured transitions and transactions that I don't think it's possible.
You know, and I think that we're going to see more encryption. The trend is toward more encryption, not toward less encryption. So I certainly agree with Susan. We will not see encryption go away. Well, Yara, I think that we've answered all of the questions that people have. We really appreciate that. Susan and I have come to call this the session after the session because it's quite common that we get lots and lots of questions, and we love them, so appreciate all the participation.
Amy, Susan, thank you very much for joining us. En iedereen heel erg bedankt voor de aanwezigheid bij deze webinar. Mochten jullie nog vragen hebben, stel ze gerust, e-mails of bel ons op of stuur een e-mail naar Verteer. Dan wil ik bij deze jullie nog een hele fijne dag wensen en misschien tot de volgende webinar.